peaceful and went to school and then Daddy carried us to Virginia in the early 50s. But what we're talking about today is Draper Speedway. Draper Speedway, I guess, started building in 49. Had a lot of weather delays, but we used to go around and put billboards on barns and telephone poles and storefronts. And then finally the weather cooperated, and John East's little dirt track come together, and people come from everywhere. And I'm not sure that Frank Mundy out of Atlanta didn't run that one time, but he was advertised Mr. X. But anyway, it ran for several years, and then it sat dormant for a couple of 3 years. And don't hold me to my figures, because I've been through a whole lot of figures in my life. But then Hewitt Hamilton come up and probably leased the track from the present day owner, and I think it was John East. But it run it for 2 or 3 years, and then it really went down. Alfred Lillard, Hunter Long, Nelson Howler, and one other player come back and reopened it again as Bi-State Speedway. And I don't know, I'm not sure how many years it run. But then it really sat down and put the chain on the gate, and it's been sitting for, I don't know, ballpark, but I got a gentleman here that's gonna get me straight on my figures. But now it's decided George Meade's grandson, Darrell Meade Gregory, has decided that he's gonna resurrect Draper Speedway. And he's got enough friends that wants to see it done, that it's gonna be done somewhere or another if we have to camp across the street in that parking lot of the factory. But I'm proud that I've run across Darrell, because he's told me things about Draper that I didn't know. He does super research, and he was George Meade's grandson. A whole lot of connections. So Darrell Meade Gregory is going to pick it up and breathe a little life into it.
Okay.
And this is Darrell to my right.
All right. I'll write a little story for Eden's Own Journal about the history of Draper, because so much of this stuff is going away, and you hear all these stories all your life, and you know, you don't have that many facts to them. So anyway, I got to the Draper Speedway, and I said, well, I got to make a two-part out of this to fit in the Eden's Own Journal. And now I'm on something like the 10th or the 11th story on it. This is just one story after another. It's a story within a story, and it's so many early racers at this racetrack. I'm just astonished. It had all the big name people in the early 50s when it was NASCAR sanctioned. John East did a real good job getting it started. It's a premier track. They even had a Western Carolina Championship run here that Pert Brown won. And then they paved the track. And it seemed like when they paved the track come apart. And even though it was repaired, it seemed like it never regained the momentum that it had when it was a dirt track. And anyway, so John messed around with it. Then he rented it out to Hewitt Hamilton and the Dixie Racing Circuit. They run a few races on it. Then John East got it back and run a race or so on it, and then it just shut down. And I'm still kind of confused why. They still had good crowds and good people coming there, and I don't understand why he shut it down. That's one of the mysteries I'm trying to figure out. So anyway, the track's laid fallow for about 5 years. Then Al Lillard and some of his friends bought it. They renamed it Bi-State. The time it's kind of past the Speedway by for being NASCAR sanctioned, because most of the tracks then was getting concrete grandstands and was upgrading, but it had a paved track, and it was intact, so they got it, and it was a new generation of racers that come through that era. And that was when, you know, Jimmy Griffith started out, Monk Tate, you know, basically the local racing legends around here. And then it run to 62, and but the track needed a lot of stands needed a lot of repairs to it. Al Lillard lost 2 of his people that was helping him, and it was he just couldn't keep the track up then, so they kind of let it go, and there hasn't been a race run there since 62. The track's still there, it's still intact, some trees going through the pavement, still got the concrete barriers there, so it's just a ghost track stuck out in the woods, you know, you never would know it's there. But it has been very interesting doing this story on it. It seemed like everybody is tied into everybody. Everybody in town has got a story about the track. They either raced there, they owned a race car, they sold concessions, they was in the stands. Everybody in this town has got a story about it. And I believe that's why I've had so much success finding this story. Write this story, because people just remember this and they just cling to it. They cling to the old pictures, and at one time, you know, you gotta look at 1950, you know, we didn't have the internet, very few movie theaters, wasn't any TV, and this was the place to be. And you know, Bill mentioned that he was down there when he was a kid putting up posters trying to get the track started. And I was fortunate, I got to ride my granddaddy's wreck truck into the racetrack in 1962, the last race year they run it at Bi-State. And he always had the wreck truck there, because he'd have the record service for everybody. And I remember 8 years old, I got to sit in my granddaddy's wreck truck and go in there, and everybody waved at George to come on in. And I thought it was the neatest thing in the world we could get into and not pay. And to go into the track, and you know, for an 8-year-old kid, it just, yeah, I ain't never seen nothing like it. I was just astonished. I remember Monk Tate's car being there, the '88, because I remember him winning the race. I don't know if it was a feature or a heat race. I remember the U-2 car, because that was right after the U-2 plane got shot down in Russia, and I said that was just a strange number on it. And I had a Roberts car there that had cartoon characters on it. And I remember my granddaddy had me by my hand walking by it, and it had the deputy dog or something painted on the car. And I said, "Oh, Big Daddy, I hope this car wins, don't you?" But it was just an exciting time for me. And they all said they was going to close the track down because the stands was falling in. And I had to stay at my grandparents on Saturday night so I could go to the race on Sunday. If I didn't, I'd have to go to church. So the last race they won, they run down here at Bi-State. I come home from church and ran up to my granddaddy's shop, and the wreck was already gone. So I missed the last race. And
what started the fire again?
When I started to write these little stories, I really didn't think that much about it, because my grandfather was not a storyteller. And you had to know the right question to ask him to get the right answer.
Yeah.
And so I started doing this stuff, going through the newspaper articles and interviewing people, and I said, good gosh, George Meade was a major player.
Yeah.
I never knew he was a major player. He run 3 cars, 78, 78 Junior, the 578W. I mean, had Perk Brown driving for him, Curtis Turner supposed to drove for him, Bobby Myers.
Daddy drove for him.
Yeah. Gordon Mangum.
Yeah.
What was it called? Wooten?
Calvin
Wooten. I mean, he had it was a lot of name players with my grandfather. And I'm saying, why in the world didn't he ever tell me about any of this? And even then, when it was the Bi-State years, you know, when basically he done quit racing, they still had race cars in the back that he let them use the back of the shop to maintain them. I remember Floyd Goins had the 29 car, the blue and white car that had a Chrysler engine on it. I think he run modifieds then. And, you know, that's about all I can remember, you know, for being 8 years old. But sometimes a child, you know, when the first time they see something, it just sticks in the mind.
Yep.
And anyway, I was going through an interview and all this stuff and find out everything about the track. I said, good gosh, this is the hottest story I'll ever run up on. There will never be another one like it. And for, you know, beginning of NASCAR, all the big name drivers being here, it was just it's just a blessing that just fell in my lap. And I have really enjoyed doing this, and I'm just going to go to the max and see how far we'll go.
I'd like to say this before our time runs out. My wife made a statement the other day that wondered if she could, how much it would cost her per day to get Daryl to call me in the mornings after I'd had my coffee, because Daryl makes me laugh and gets me started for the day. But I put out a set of books about probably 6, 8 years ago, and I thought I'd done a lot of research. Now I really did, I thought I did. But Daryl has told me things that I didn't even know about. I mean, there wasn't no such thing as going to try to research this, because it hadn't crossed my screen. And between me and him together, hey, it ain't, I look forward to his phone calls, and I always check my phone before I cut it off, and sometimes we'll talk 25 minutes, and sometimes we'll talk 45 minutes. But I really appreciate him doing what he does. Hey, he's made a whole lot of old folks happy, racing folks.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about.
And I want to give Bill credit. If he had not done those 2 books, I would never be where I'm at today. It's just like it broke the doors down. It was one key after another, those books that I was able to follow, that I would have never found if he hadn't done that research. And the research he done to put these 2 books out it's big. I couldn't have done it. So
Well, thank you, Daryl.
I don't know how you done it.
It was like I was doing my life, because I got started in it when I was 10 years old. And it was like I was I designed it for research, and I've got it in several different colleges, and it's designed where you can fold it and copy articles or pictures. But I want to do a second round. I go 47 to 56, 2 volumes, and I've got enough to go from 57 to 62, and probably I hope I get around to doing it. And if I don't, after Daryl gets old enough to retire and goes on his 4th book, maybe I can turn my research over to him, and he can finish the dirt races too. Hey, why not?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ricky.
Well, I'm Ricky. I'm on the other end of the camera, and I want to thank Darryl Gregory and Bill Mangum for this very interesting interview, and I salute both of their efforts. I'm a videographer, but I'm also a huge race fan, even from the old days. And Daryl, could you tell me in the research you've done and what you've started, do you foresee any possibility of the track itself maybe being reopened one day? Is that kind of a dream? Or?
It's definitely a dream. Times done went by. You know, they don't really have no facilities down there. You know, power, running water, or nothing like that. It's basically just a paved track out in the woods. The insurance regulations would kill it. And now, you know, the zoning laws have done, they've got a residence right beside of it, and that would stop it from ever reopening. The best thing we could ever hope for is you know, to get the track and clean it up and be able to use it for events, you know, like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But as far as having a real race and everything, it just wouldn't be feasible.
Right. Well, I want to thank both of you again
Well,
for
thank
this
you,
interview,
Rick.
gentlemen.
Thank you for
Yeah, I
coming.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Buddy Darrell, and we got a good young fellow that's a friend of ours, just graduated from NC State, supposed to be here today, and he's, that's what we need in this, is a youth wanting to know.
Hmm.
And I'm gonna finish it off with this. I walked through the pits South Boston the last time, the legendary Flathead Forwards race, and this young person come over to me, and he said, "Mr. Ma'am, could I ask you a question?" I said, "Certainly." He said, "When y'all was racing down here in the early days, did y'all run as fast as these legendary Flathead Forwards?" And I says, "I like to think so, but we didn't. We didn't have the technology they got with the Flatheads today. They just resemble what we used to race.
Still had a good time, though.
Still having a good time." Thank you.
Okay, we're glad to have with us now Hank Thomas and Randy Myers. And Hank and Randy will share some stories together and tell us a little bit about each other. Randy, if you'll start, we'll let you start up and say a few things, and then we can roll it right over to Hank.
I'd be happy to. I guess I'm more of I'm the second generation of the Myers family, and myself and my brother Gary and our dad, Billy Myers, and my uncle Bobby Myers both raced here at Draper, and Bill Blair told me about this event a couple of days ago, and then Hank called a couple of days ago as well and wanted to come up, and I've been kind of looking forward to it. It's a neat place. I don't actually remember coming to Draper, although I'm sure I probably did with Mom and Daddy when he was racing here. And one of my stories that I remember that Mother always told me was that Daddy stopped the race up here one day. It got so dusty and rocky that he had to just park the car and got the red flag out of the flag stand and stopped the race. It got so bad, but I'm sure he won a race or two here. I know from a couple articles I saw in some more Mr. Mead's, I guess the Mead family's collection outside, that he had won a race or two here, and actually saw a couple of photos that I had never seen before that Bill Magnum had shared. So it's been already been worthwhile coming up and enjoyed it so far. And it's a neat thing that people do remember the history of the sport, because it goes back so far. And the fans today, they really don't know what they missed back in the days, the early days. So my dad, Bill Myers, and my Uncle Bobby Myers were part of the founding heroes, I guess, of the sport back in the day. And NASCAR to this day still honors them with Myers Brothers Memorial Award that's presented by the National Motorsports Press Association. And they do a banquet, or part of the NASCAR Cup banquet in Vegas each year is a Myers Brothers luncheon. And it's nice to be remembered by the folks that started it all. So I used to work for Hank. He mentioned, I know before we started the video, that he raced back in the early days and remembered my dad. And of course I worked for Hank 2 different times and enjoyed a lot of it. There were days that I got to talk to the hand too, but we still had fun and hauled a lot of gas and sold a lot of parts and enjoyed it. And let Hank roll on a while, because he's the racer of the crowd.
All right, Hank, tell us something about
Well, I
yourself.
like to always say with employees, we're family, and employees, we work together, not for. They don't work for me, they work with me, and that part of it. So many stories, because I've been there a long time. Next year will be 60 years that I've been in racing. It was some of the stories, and I'll jump around a little bit because I don't have a teleprompter, and some of them will get the use of the teleprompter and know the meaning. But anyway, I raced at Bi-State 50 some years ago, and I didn't know. I thought I'd won some races. I don't like to say much about winning races if I hadn't got documentation. In 2008, a man come in with a program. Some of these stories go a long time, so I'll abbreviate a lot. Come in with a program, and he asked Bill Mangum of Virginia Carolinas Early Dirt Racers Association, had a program, and the front page had Roy Doolin and Hank Thunderberg. And he said, is either one of these here? And he said, Roy Doolin's passed on, Hank Thunderberg is standing over there, but he'll probably answer to Hank Thomas. So real quickly about that, when NASCAR would take you points, so I carried a second car, and my partner was Ray Thomas, so we swapped last names, and that's where the Hank Thunderberg comes from, as the pictures and all. This gentleman had a program which he said he would send me a copy of every page. So here today, if someone wants to see some of this, they can and know who raced there. I came 6 times, won 5 of them, and was second in the other one. Some of the things that I'm proud of is some of the things like having won some races the last time. Draper Speedway, I think I won the last 2 races there. I'm trying to find a document to that before it closed. Asheville Regal, I think I won the last race there before it closed. So most of this was in the 60s, and they called them amateurs at Bi-State, and I don't know why I didn't race on, because in 61 at Bowman Gray, after 3 races, I got a telegram from Daytona that said I couldn't run hobbies anymore. So I quit my job, bought me a modified, and went racing. So if anybody has any rundown on 1962 at Occoneechee Speedway, the mile dirt track, which I was fortunate to run second, I have seen a little article. I'd like to see supposedly about 60 cars. started my business officially in '61. We built cars through late '90s. Built a lot of well-known cars. One of the most prominent was a car for Clarence Pickerel of Clarence's Steakhouse in Martinsville, which still does well. A lot of people visit there. And then we sold a lot of cars in New England. Used to fly to New England sometime to help people with their cars. And I did get elected into the Memory Lane Hall of Fame in Mooresville. Very interesting place. Alex Bean, if you ever get a chance and want history, be sure to visit it. It's well done. I drag raced a while, and 2 years ago I got an award at the North Carolina Drag Racing Hall of Fame. These things mean a lot to me. In my pictures, I try to put captions, and I try to encourage my son, who took a modified car that runs the local tracks, put a body on it, went to Daytona, run the road course, and was able to amazingly qualify 6 full seconds ahead of the second place car out of 29 cars. So, fathers, grandfathers, brothers, sisters, and all, put your captions on your pictures and share them all. And I love to listen as good as I do talk.
And I'd argue with that, because he does like to talk, I promise you. But he's 100% right in the picture category, because if you don't put those captions on them, it doesn't matter how, who gets a hold of them or anything else. It's they wind up out on the internet, and people claim them as their own and such as that. And your pictures of your family and your friends that's been in this industry for years and years and years needs to be captioned and titled and shared with the world that's out there, because the more we share what we had, the more people will remember, and the better it will be remembered in the future.
Now, Randy, what are you doing today? Are you still involved in racing in some aspect?
I am. I'm the series director for the Southern Modified Race Tour, which is maybe a little bit better known as the Coma Unwind Modified Madness Series. We run about 12 races a year. I've had 4 already this year. Got one coming up July the 3rd at Hickory, and then July the 17th down at Anderson, South Carolina. So it's a North Carolina, South Carolina, Southern Virginia tour, and we have a good time with it. And there's still a place for the open wheel cars, and we're trying to keep that part of it going and build it as we go. So that's my claim to fame right now.
Okay. Well, I appreciate both of you talking with me and being part of this video and part of this day. Either one of you have any more stories you'd like to share?
Well, it's at the end of our 10 minutes.
Well, no, you can talk some more. If you talk too much, I can cut out some of it. But no,
See, he said he didn't like to talk, but he does.
You both are doing fine.
I spoke at a school way back in the day, and it was seniors. Now, what in the world can I speak for like 30 or 35 minutes? I got in there and started rattling off just on and on and on. And then soon the teacher said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas, but your time's up." So maybe I talk more than I think I do. But I really get excited about these things, and I look so forward to it. And a little quick story, that these things that you do find out, a gentleman come to me, and he said that I was shaming them in their Chevrolet, which we run at Martinsville 4 times. I'd love to see this in writing. They tried weekly racing, it didn't work, and they quit. Run 4 races. I won those 4 races. But he said you had some magical rear end in your Plymouth from somewhere, and we'd like to know what it was. And he said it was from Oklahoma or something. I said, no, there was a rear end, a gear, special gear for a milk truck out of a car that was from Iowa. And so now he knows that, and he can pass it on. But the more the people talk to one another, we got to have the older people like myself to pass on this information to the other people, so we get documentations and friendship, so somebody maybe in 30, 40 years, 50 years, they can look and say, well, I read this document that I feel like is really true, instead of just information. That's why the pictures and the documentation and all is so important.
There's so much that's been, it gets lost and falls through the cracks. So much of the things that you see at events like this as opposed to going to the Hall of Fame in Charlotte and those kinds of things. You know, the Hall of Fame in Charlotte, the bottom floor where they got the Glory Road, is a great part of the museum. The middle floor where they got today's stuff, I could care less about it. And people my age and Hank's age, we could care less about that middle floor. But I guess they do that to keep the younger people involved, or give them something they can relate to. But when you go to the third floor of the Hall of Fame, that's where it's all at. It's you know, the Key Cavers, Chryslers, and the Flocks and the Myerses and everybody that was involved in the sport back then. That's where the history to the NASCAR Hall of Fame is. And you know, these little gatherings like this, or you know, that's what, you know, what really keeps this sport going. It's the history and the stories that you tell, like Hank's told, and a couple that I can relate to. But I'm sure you've talked with Bill Magnum and Bill Blair and those people who are deep into the history and the things that they continue to do, make all of this worthwhile.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, both of you. Appreciate
Okay.
your time.
Appreciate it.
One more time?
Go
One
ahead.
more time, and visit hankthomasperformance.com and look at the webpage, and I yield the rest of my time.
All right. Thank you. We're glad to have Gary Llewellyn, and Gary will introduce Jerry in just a moment, and they both have some interesting stories to tell. Again, we're here for Draper Speedway Racers Reunion along with the car show. So I was just explaining to these gentlemen, this is very informal, and we're having a good time telling some racing stories. So Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you start talking.
Well, I don't know really where to start at, but I'll just tell you a little bit about my dad and the history of his racing. Back when he started back in 1938, and started racing motorcycles. Supplement his income, he did a little liquid refreshment delivery around the area between High Point and Wilkesboro and Virginia, and a lot of times did it with his motorcycles. He raced motorcycles in the early days, Harleys and Indians on the flat tracks, and then that got him involved with car racing, and ultimately he started running dirt tracks, modified sportsman cars. I guess that's what you called them back then. And then the war broke out. And he went off to Europe for 4 years and come back. I think 2 weeks after he got out of service in 1945, he was racing again. And of course, he raced under the banners of AAA and Dixie Circuit, and then for France out of Greensboro with the other organization before NASCAR. And I guess I come along when he was running Grand National. He was a 50 modified champion at Bowman Gray, driving a little 35 coupe number 0. And then he drove Grand National for most of the big owners back then, Ernest Woods and people like that that fielded more than one car. He drove the Oldsmobiles and the Plymouths and the Mercuries, and in particular in 1954s when I would come along, he was running in the Southern 500 driving a 54 Mercury for Joe Blair out of High Point, number 5. So he raced up to 1960 on all the divisions, and then he just moved it back to running short tracks, local dirt, asphalt, and quit about 1975. So,
Kind of went back to his roots, so to
so
speak.
went back to his roots, and I accompanied him on a lot of those races, a lot of those tracks, a lot of those fiascos. And I did a little racing myself, run with the old flathead group, the old coupes. But there's a lot of stuff there, a lot of stories could be told. I noticed that when I was in here a while ago, I saw a little black model car sitting over on one of the tables. It had number 47 on it. And I guess if you want to put something in perspective as far as having some notoriety, that I know Jerry's daddy, is well famous for the 45 car with Mason. And but the 47 was a Joe Wolf car, and in 1952, Dad, it was completely filmed. I guess one of the first races they filmed full length on the beach course at Daytona. There was 97 cars in that race that day.
Wow.
And he led the pack with that black 47 Joe Wolf car, and a fellow out here's got a replica of it. And Daytona or NASCAR uses that lead-in sometime to the Daytona 500, showing them going down the beach course in that black 47. So Dad was the one running that car that day.
Right.
So I've always sort of been partial to that car number and that color.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna turn it over to Jerry Thompson, and he can tell you about his daddy.
Okay, my name's Jerry Thomason, and my dad started racing back in 1949, and the first couple of races he ran under the name Perk Thomason. And my dad's real name is Jack Graham Thomason. And when he was growing up, his grandmother nicknamed him Perk. So, like I say, when he first started, he ran under Perk Thomason, which was his last name. That didn't sound too good to him, so then he changed it to his middle name. And he raced under the name of Perk Brown. And that's what he used his whole racing career. Most people don't know. I have to answer that question. Well, how could I be a Thomason and him a Brown? I said, well, my dad's middle name was Brown. So that's where he got the name Perk Brown. And he's told so many stories, had a wonderful racing career. Started out on the old dirt tracks in local areas and had a very successful career, raced for a lot of good owners. And I guess the one he lasted the longest with was in Mason number 45, and started in 1955. And I think Bowman Gray, Draper Speedway, Draper Field. It's just numerous tracks that he was really successful on. And I went to a lot of those races, and we brought a lot of trophies home. And I think us kids might have broke up quite a few of them, but he won quite a few in his career. And Dad really enjoyed his racing, and he was kind of a fans person. He enjoyed talking to all his fans and would stay a long time after the race just talking and reminiscing about old times. So he had a wonderful racing career.
Okay. Thank you both. Anybody like to add anything before we wrap up?
I don't have anything else other than that. The history is the history, and
Absolutely.
we keep it out there for people to know about.
Thank you, guys. Okay, we're really glad to have here with us now Monk Tate on my left and Bill Blair on my right. Monk and Bill are both have a lot of heritage related to Draper Speedway, and I know they both can tell us a lot of good racing stories. I know Bill's still racing. I see him racing. I don't know. I'm sure Monk is involved in racing still, in one way or another. But Bill, I'd like to just start with you and have you tell us some stories about yourself and what you've been doing and what you are doing now.
Well, I'm glad to tell you about the activities of my life, and it all started back right after the war, World War II, and I was following my daddy around to all the races. He was racing before the war and then went to the Baltimore during the war to build battleships. And when he got home, he immediately started back into racing. And so I've just been a little kid, born in 1938. Racing was, all those guys were my heroes, and the other heroes was the Cowboys, the big Western Cowboys, Lash LaRue, Sunset Carson, Gene Autry and all. And I look back at that today, that was the best of our times to grow up. We didn't have all this crap like's going on today, and that'll never happen again. But I witnessed history being made in automobile racing. It was in its infancy back then. I got to meet all the Flock brothers, Bob, Fonnie, and Tim, Red Byron, Red Vault, Ed Samples, and on and on. And I failed the third grade because of that. All I could do is go to school, draw pictures of race cars, and the teacher showed up later that year and told my parents that, hey, this kid, he's a good kid, but he don't know nothing but about race cars. So I stayed in the 3rd grade extra year, and they moved me on. But I went to many races with my father, and as I said, got to meet all these people. And back in those days, there were no interstates. To go from Atlanta anywhere up through here, you had to come right by the farms, and they always stopped by to talk to my daddy and get free milk. I lived on a dairy farm. So it was the best of everything for me back then. And as I said, saw a lot of history. Bill France used to hang out over there to promote his races, and my daddy built a racetrack in 47 Tri-City Speedway. He and his brother Bob. Bill France, with his first organization, he sanctioned it. It was NCSCC. That was the name of it before it was a NASCAR. And from there, when we talk about Draper here, in 49, when this track was built, they had already ran their first strictly stock race June the 19th in Charlotte. And my daddy led 155 laps of that 200 lap race, and come in and get gas and put a quart of oil in it, and somebody that was not even associated with the car reached over the shoulder of the guy putting oil in, as a Lincoln, and took the radiator cap off, and the water gushed out of it, and they poured more water in it, cracked the thermostat housing, and put him out of the race. Well, anyway, shortly thereafter, they had a big crowd at the old Charlotte, they called it the New Charlotte Speedway back then. It's a 3/4 mile dirt track built by 2 bootleggers. And France had reportedly in the newspaper like 16,000 people. Well, they had to turn people away. It's more like 22,000. And he called my daddy up and told him to sell that modified, that the future was going to be in strictly stock, which turned into being Grand National and now Cup racing. And France told him to sell it. This is the future. So he sold his car later on that year, and he did come to one race up here at Draper. Where he finished, I don't know, but I have a picture of him on the backstretch. And my interest in coming to places like the Draper reunion here is I like the history of what racing was. I don't care much about what they're doing today, but back in those days, it was really racing. That's when I say racing was racing. You had more fellowship, camaraderie. Yeah, you had your scuffs and all, but you didn't have a stack of rules, and you didn't have to have engineers to design race cars and all. If these guys could dream it in their worst nightmare, they could go the next day and build it. Isn't that right, Mom?
That's right.
And that's when racing, I just say it over and over again, it was racing. And I'll just tell you straight up, I loved it, I loved it. I don't care what to do, they can't take that away from me. That was the best period of our time in stock car racing, period.
Now, Bill, you're still active in racing yourself even today, right?
Well, I helped the High Point Museum when they had an exhibit on racers around High Point, North Carolina, in this area about 10, 12, 15 years ago. And I met a guy that was in charge of groundskeeping at the old High Point Speedway, and they were making a housing development out of it. So I went up with Barbara Taylor of the High Point Museum to scout around the area. And this gentleman showed me some pictures. There was a Flathead Ford club that they had gotten together and established, and invited me to come to a meeting, so I did, at Clarence's Steakhouse in Martinsville, Virginia. I know you've eaten there.
Oh, yeah.
And met Clarence Pickrell, I believe is his name, and he sponsored a lot of race cars, Clarence did. And so I joined the club, bought a car, and started racing it because that's what my daddy did, and I just enjoyed it. I still got the car and still participate, and we have a great time, you know. And that club originally was supposed to reestablish and pay honor to the early day racers and the cars that started stock car racing. Actually, the cars that did started in right after the war, say 46, and they had some races in 39 and 40, and then the war came along, was the 39 and 40 Fords. And that was the cars also that the bootleggers liked, and they said they had the best handling characteristics, and today we know that is balance. But those cars were good from the get-go. So the club really was to keep the history and heritage alive for the old Flathead Ford. And the first Flathead Ford come out in 1939, Henry Ford, which was a 60 horsepower. And that just changed the whole deal. My daddy bought 2 of them, and the first thing he did was get caught in Martinsville with 125 gallons of white liquor. They blocked the bridge off crossing the Dan River, and he couldn't get back into North Carolina, so they chased him back to Martinsville and shot his tires down. And they was chasing him around the block up there, made 4 or 5 laps around the square, and they finally stopped him, put him in jail. So they called his daddy, and his daddy was a congressman here in North Carolina, and well-to-do guy, started the Elks Club and 2 churches and all, and they called him up. And of course his daddy, John Blair, had no idea of what my daddy was doing. And they told him, said, or asked him, said, you have a son named William Ivy Blair? And he said, yes, sir, what can I do for you? And the master up there said, well, we caught your son up here, me and Bill, with 125 gallons of white liquor just a few minutes ago. And Mr. Blair thought a minute, and he said, well, I'll tell you what you do, sir. He said, being you caught him, you just keep him. And hung the phone up. So Bill's mother, Llewellyn, she sent the oldest brother up to get him out of jail. It cost $10 to get him out when he was tried at the Western District Court in Danville in March of 1933. It cost him $100, and back then they didn't take your car. But really, some of them say that he introduced racing to Martinsville in they caught him on Christmas Eve in 1932. Chased him around the square. Yeah, you know, when they say stock car racing was started by bootleggers and moonshiners, to a certain element, that's probably true, but not all of them did that. But my daddy, that's where he started, was in the liquor business, and it got into racing because they built the High Point Speedway across the street from the 1 mile, from the old dairy, the 1 mile track they built there in 1940 was right across the street from the Clover Hill dairies. So, you know, that's why I like early day racing, and I like to talk about it. And I know more about that than I do current day racing. And then as through the years progress, I built racing engines, worked for Jim Paschal, and worked for American Motors building their race engines, and met and admired people like Monk Tate. Monk was one of the best in this area, in my opinion, with that 0 car and 88 car. And then he had some other people like Bobby Apple driving for him, but this guy sitting right here is really an honor to be sitting here with him on this sofa.
Mike, we're really glad to have you take part of this today, and I was explaining to you and Bill before we started this interview that my dad started taking me to the races at South Boston Speedway when I was 4 years old, and I remember seeing you race many times. Today is the first opportunity I've had to meet you in person, but tell us some of your experiences of racing, how you got started and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I grew up on a biker farm with much racing going on. I just bought me an old car and some old pipe in it. And I know roll bar tubing. You know, we bent them in the fork of an apple tree, got them welded in there, and we started running South Boston and we at Bi-State Speedway. And I had some good racers in both places. And I know Jimmy Griffin was best one to, you know, best competitor. And me and him, we'd race together and we'd fight. And I know we'll forget one day, I was leading the race and Jimmy was getting up at my left back wheel. And he said I cut him off, but I didn't figure he was up that far enough. And I looked in the mirror and he was going around like a button on the John House door. And he went through his fence and I pulled around and was going to help him get his car up, and because we were putting on the show. And he come to the car and cut me across the arm, and I was swinging up in there kicking and all, and I finally got out. And Melvin Cheney was holding him, and I hit him. We went down that bank, bright honeysuckles and everything. And I messed in my britches. I put out so much. And I had to get back in the car, and I went around there and won the race. And when the race was over, I went to straight to old Johnny house, and old Bill Jarrett was on the rescue squad truck. He come over, he said, "What's the matter, Mom?" I said, "I messed all over myself." I said, "I ain't got no more clothes with me now." He went over and got a brand new sheet out of the rescue squad truck, and I wiped all I could off of me. But you know, after that, Jimmy Griffin, the last race he won it in my car at Fayetteville.
How about that?
And we come to be the best friends you ever saw. He was one of the best machinist I ever saw. And
Monk, I remember seeing from the days at South Boston. Of course, I'm a little younger than the two of you. I'm on the other side of the camera, by the way, so nobody's seeing me. But I remember your cars being painted the same color scheme as a 00 of Sam Art. So was there a connection there between you and
Well,
Sam?
Thomas Brothers just give me so much help now. Yeah, my car, which Sam's car belonged to them. I
Right.
just drove it. Yeah.
So it was two separate cars, not
Oh,
part
yeah,
of the same
two
team.
separate cars, yeah.
Right.
But they were some good people. I went to Howard's funeral not long ago, and he was a good man. It was.
So how long did you race actively, Monk? When did you hang up the helmet?
When to do what?
When did you hang your helmet up as far as racing on a regular basis?
Oh, about 4 years ago. I had a knee operation and replacement, and I couldn't get back in the car good, and I got somebody to start driving.
Right.
And I ain't drove none since. And I done had the other knee replaced.
So you're still involved some even today, though?
Oh yeah, I
You have-
still got an open wheel modified.
Oh, okay. And
Been racing down at 80 Speedway.
right. You ever race that down at Bowman Gray Speedway?
I did a little bit with a hobby car back
Mhm.
when I first started.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember reading recently that unfortunately Ace Speedway's
Wasn't long
closed
ago,
for a while, but
I went to the race over not long ago. I mean, they fill that place up with people.
that they do. They draw a good crowd every week.
Yeah. And my boys, they do real good over there.
They sure do. Really enjoyed talking to both of you. Either one of you have any more you'd like to?
Well, I'd like to ask Monk a question or remind him something, see if he remembers it. I knew some of the Goodyear boys who worked for Huggins, and they always looked forward to you going to the racetrack. And one of us telling me down at New Smyrna one time that you need some tires and so forth, and you had a little bit of that old Mountain Dew. And it ended up, he got all the tire help that he needed down there. You remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
He always treated people, he treated people good and shared.
Tom Parnell, you
Yeah,
know
that's
him?
him, that's him.
Tom Parnell, we was at Hickory racing one day, and he had a tie to me. He said, "Come over, I got a tie, brand new tie here. Somebody run over something, stuck it hole in." And he said, "Patch this thing and maybe put it on the left side or something." So I put it on the right front and won the race. And he said, "I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have put that tie on there with a patch on it on the right front."
The other boy was named Clint.
Yeah.
And then they had Henry,
Yeah.
color boy, nice.
You know, later on, Cliff was sawing wood or something, sprung one in there and put one in his
I
eyes
didn't
out.
know
Yeah.
that. They just tell you there was some very good people in racing back
Yeah,
then.
they were
Yeah.
real good.
And I said earlier, nobody ever gonna experience what we did.
Yeah.
There was a lot of camaraderie there then, and they have it today also, but
Yeah.
seems in a different
I had
way.
a
It's
late
on
model,
different level.
I had a late model car I run down at, they used to call it Trico Speedway, it's Orange County now.
Mhm.
And Fred Daniels was running the track in, and every time he was gonna get somebody like Cale or David Pearson, he'd call me, we're gonna rent my car. And I said, "Well, I've been working on my car to outrun them, I hear they're coming." And he said, "We can't get nobody to let them drive the car." I said, "Well," $500 plus what he win, he said, "Bring it on." And most of the time they won the race. I know Pearson did, and Benny Parson did. I think Leroy Yarborough drove my car down there.
Mhm.
Monk had the good cars. I mean, they ran.
He always had a very competitive car. Had a good car.
Sort of like Rick Hendricks' cars run good everywhere they go, and Monk's did. And had
Yeah, Ray Hendricks, he run good down there, and Clayton Mitchell owned his car, he said, "Well, Monk's a man to beat when we leave, Monk's a man we figuring on beating."
I saw one of your competitors this week, Jack Tance, you know Jack?
Yeah, oh yeah.
That's David Hill.
Jack's really aged, ain't
86. But he still does good.
he? I had a Jack Camp motor in my car when I won Martinsville, '75.
He won 20, his engines and cars won 29 races in Martinsville.
That's an unbelievable record. That
Yeah.
makes you wonder if that'll ever be broken.
You
He
been
built,
to Jack's
he built a
race.
good engine. He knows how much he could put in there and it'd live.
Just enough to get the horsepower in there and get the durability in there.
See, sitting on the pole ain't no good if you don't finish.
That's right. That's right. Monk, what about racing today? Do you follow racing that much yourself?
Yeah.
Still
Well,
enjoy it?
Just the modified while I'm running mostly. I don't go to these
Cup
big
races.
races. and all.
Right. That's it seems to be that has diminished some over the years as far as the crowds have
Yeah.
cut back some from what they once were. I guess the economy has something to do with it and a lot of different factors.
It got
But
so expensive, yeah.
Well, I'll give you my opinion of racing. I know you want to keep it short and maybe get Monk's input. But, you know, talking to you earlier when racing was racing, when Monk raced, my daddy raced, and I ended up working with Jim Paschal, who you knew.
Yeah.
Jim Paschal's like my second father. In fact, my daddy got him into racing. And Jim Paschal won 20-some NASCAR Cup races over the years. He still holds the record for the most second place finishes 1956, which was 19. But anyway, we run 50-some races in 1956 with that Mercury and Jim Paschal driving.
Yeah.
And there wasn't but two of us working on that car, and I was in school. I'd come in the afternoon, then sometime I'd go with him. Run all those races, and Jim made a living. He paid me 20 to 40, maybe sometimes $60 a week. That's all I made, and I was happy. My daddy gave me an old race car, and I put it back on the street where we could drive it. And today, to do that same thing, they've got to have several hundred people, and if you divide that out, that's about 100 people working on one car. And Jim did it from week to week from what he won. And they got to have $25 million to run a race car today.
mhm.
And the crowd in those days, they could go buy a car like you saw on the racetrack. You could relate to a Mercury, Ford, Chevrolet, Pontiac. Today, you can't relate to that.
Right.
It's all cookie cutter stuff. And they know today, the average fan knows that you can't buy that at a dealership.
Right.
And Jim's car comes from a dealership. All my daddy's cars come from a dealership. And in the early days, you went to the junk yard to get your pieces. The only speed shop was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Honest Charlie. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
And today you get on the phone, get about anything. My daddy did not finish school. Jim Paschal finished school in the Navy. Today they got to have engineers to race. And they don't run but 30 races a year, 30, 31, and we're running 50 some. You probably run 50 races a year, run 2 or 3 nights a week. And it just ain't racing no more, it's a show. It's a show. If you got one man that runs off, they're gonna penalize him and draw it all back in. And I guess people come today like Daytona, Talladega to see the big wreck. And when they're gonna end up down there one day killing about 2 or 3 people at one lick. And those 2 tracks are white elephants, is what they are. But how do you feel about that, Monk?
Yeah. I never did keep up with it much.
And they last all afternoon.
Yeah.
I go to sleep after about an hour, and sometimes I wake back up and see the finish. And
I take a nap in between. I doze off after about the first 100 miles and wake up to see the last 100.
Yeah.
But they did it all in one day, didn't they? You
Yeah.
get there
Oh, yeah.
right before noon.
Yeah.
You get there to get the practice. Then next thing you do, you qualify. Then you run a heat race, consolation race, and the race. And it's done. You go home.
Now,
Today,
it's about 3 days, ain't it?
yeah, it's ridiculous. And they gouge you. Look what it costs you. The motels up their room rates for the weekend. Daytona, you got to get you rooms no less than like what 5 days. You got to rent a room for it. You can't get it for a day or 2. I mean, it's gouge.
And it's a higher rate when it's a racing town
What was
at the motel.
What was the biggest race you ever won?
Well, I guess with Jim Paschal, you know, I'd have to think about it, but one I remember in particular was the 1972 Wide World of Sports with Jim McKay.
Yeah.
The race at Bone Grove Stadium, Grand American. Paschal won it, and course, I built the engine, that was my part in it then. And Darrell Bryant did the chassis work, you remember Darrell?
Yeah.
And Cliff Stewart owned the car, and Jim Pascal drove it, flag to flag. First NASCAR race ever shown from flag to flag. And then David Pearson finished second. Probably one that stands out in my mind, and of course, that midnight Powerville race won that, then that race at Charlotte that Pascal won. You know, they all went, when you won one, you went to next week, that was gone, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so the next one was always the best,
Yeah.
and, you know.
Biggest one I won was Martinsville. I won the sportsman race in 1975. Bowdoin won the modified.
You had Jack Tank motor.
Yeah, Jack Tan motor, and had sponsors Thomas Brothers Country Ham, and Swanson Chapel was my crew chief. He called the shots.
I got Jim give me the trophy when he won at Martinsville, but it was back in the older days,
Yeah.
you know. But anyway, they were all big to me.
Yeah.
I just
Oh yeah, I enjoyed all of them.
It's interesting, what you were talking about earlier, Bill, about the fans relating to the cars and seeing a car on the track that they could go by off a showroom floor. And I remember reading recently that Junior Johnson, when he won the Daytona 500, and I want to say maybe it was 1960 around there, he was trying to run a Chevrolet against the Pontiacs, and had even thought about just not the Pontiacs were so much faster, but they did go by a Chevrolet off the showroom floor, as I remember it, and headed ready to race within a week. And it was that particular race that Junior Johnson discovered drafting. And although he had a slower race car, all of a sudden out on the track while competing, he found out that he could tuck in behind on the tail end of that car in front of him, even though they were faster, had more power, and run with them. And he was able to use drafting to win that race that
I
day.
understand what you're saying, but I think Muck would agree. We knew about drafting before, and we just didn't call it that.
Just didn't
But
come.
Daytona just happened to be a speedway that you could utilize it there.
Right.
You could take liquor cars and revenue cars chasing one another, and people racing one another back about 55 and 6. I know because I experienced it. If you were behind a car and racing on the highway, you could pull out and pass and get so far, and you'd ride like this. You wouldn't go no further unless you pulled back in front of him. If you did, then he's gonna pull back out and pass you.
Mhm.
I've done that down there on Highway 64 between Ashburn and Lexington, racing on Friday and Saturday night down there.
Right.
We didn't call it drafting. We just realized
Just knew what was happening.
what it was. But I mean, yeah, that's right. And you talking about the Chevrolet and the Ball Chevrolet. You know, back in those days, if your daddy was a carpenter, you was probably gonna be a carpenter. If your daddy was a Chevrolet guy, you was probably gonna buy a Chevrolet.
Mhm.
See, it's not like that anymore.
Right. Yeah. A lot of loyalty in those days to product and everything. Well, I appreciate both of you talking to me. It's been a very good interview, and appreciate both of you being here today and taking part.
We could talk for another hour or two, but I hope it works for you. Glad to do it.
Bye.